Welcome to 20 Minute Tabletop, a podcast sharing the love of all things tabletop gaming in bite-sized pieces. I'm your host, John Wicke, here today with my co-host, Stevie.
Today, we're going to step into a world of fantasy. So grab your great axe and bow, your wizard hat and potion bottles, call your animal companion to your side, and join us to talk about Pathfinder Second Edition.
Pathfinder is the first in a line of many tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs as they're commonly called, that we plan to play and share with you. Pathfinder is created by Paizo, and the opening paragraph in their core rulebook is a great description about what Pathfinder is. Pathfinder is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game where you, and a group of friends, gather to tell a tale of brave heroes and cunning villains in a world filled with terrifying monsters and amazing treasures. More importantly, Pathfinder's a game where your character's choices determine how the story unfolds. So, let's start with our first impressions. The best way to put my first impression is familiar but new. Having played the first edition of Pathfinder, which was also my first TTRPG, I can feel a lot of the similarity in things, but I love the new mechanics.
My first experience with playing Pathfinder was with you, John, being our GM, and playing with the kids. It was pretty easy to learn, especially with the pre-generated character sheets.
Yeah, I've gotten to play a handful of times in one extended adventure, but the majority of my time has been GMing or running the games, which is fun because I get to experience so many of the parts of the system. Now, I could talk about this all day, but this is just our first impressions, and we only have 20 minutes.
So, how do we get started?
Well, that's kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of different moving parts of a TTRPG, but there's, some easy ways to get started here. Many TTRPGs have a decent barrier to entry. However, Paizo is great about offering ways to lessen that burden. One of my first and favorite things is that all rules are available for free on 2e.aonprd.com. The rulebooks have a lot of value in the reading and presentation, but they're not necessary to play. You can get everything for free from their site on all the rules, all the monsters, everything is right there.
You can also find pre-gen characters. They have iconics for every class, and you can get those sheets from Paizo.com. They even offer level 1 and level 5 versions for whatever type of game you're going to try, and some even have level 3 sheets.
Yeah, I love the iconics. They even have their own lore, and a lot of them have just backstory from through all of Pathfinder 1e and now 2e. That's great, but that's a whole other conversation. That's a whole other episode. Another great place is the beginner box and free adventures. So the beginner box gives you everything you need to start playing. I'm sure that's something we could do a future episode on, all alone on its own.
Definitely.
It's got a simplified rule set, character sheets, and a small adventure with maps and a story to go with it. But with that, they also release a free adventure every year as part of Free RPG Day. And we actually went out this year and got the last one, Fistful of Flowers, which is an adventure of just Leshies, which I love a Leshie character.
I'm excited for that one. Some other great tools. There's Path Builder 2e that makes it really easy to create your own character. We've used this, myself and my fellow players, for the games that we're playing with John, which is really cool because you can use pieces from all of the Paizo source books, and they even offer 2 of the Battle Zoo books, and it walks you through every single thing you need to decide on at every level. So it actually makes it really easy because no one has to sit there and do the math for you. You can just say, oh, I need to choose this thing. I need to choose that thing.
Yeah, it's really easy to share the character sheets so you guys can send them to me to go, hey, how's this idea? And how does this look? And it's kind of very easy for me to then double check that you have everything you need. And then kind of as a GM, I like to try to make myself familiar with your character, so that way it takes some of the burden off of you to know what are your abilities, what special things can you do, and I can look over them, and if I remember it 1 time out of 10 and you remember it 1 time out of 10, then we're getting it part of the time.
Another thing I really like is the pf2.tools hub. I have a spellcasting character, and I was able to go and create a reference sheet for myself of the spells that I knew and print it off, and that was really helpful in game because I don't have to constantly remember, oh, these are the other spells I can sub in my spell slots. I just have a list. It tells me what they do. It tells me their range. And so at the beginning of my day, when I need to switch those out, it makes it really quick and easy because I have a list right there and they generate all the rules that go with that spell.
The community is really great. It does have a learning curve, but if you just start with the rules you need first, and you can kind of go from there. And that's where the beginner box is great because it actually does a little pre-trimming of the rules down for you to kind of get you started.
Right, and then as you run into other things, you can say, hey, just so you know. And I mean, that's the benefit of a good GM, is they know those rules, and when you do finally run across that incident or that event, they'll fill you in and say, hey, just so you know, at this point, this is the rule that comes into play. So you're not bombarding your players with too much information to start with. You're able to start them with the basics and then step them up and add those rules on as needed.
So let's talk about some of those mechanics. My favorite thing about role-playing games is that they're a collaborative storytelling process. It makes a great experience. In Pathfinder, the base way to play is one person acts as the GM that we kind of talked about, and sets the scene and presents challenges. And then the other players take the role of the characters and interact with this world. It may mean you're fighting a monster, or solving a puzzle, gathering information to solve a mystery, or talking your way out of trouble. I mean, I don't think you guys do that too often, but it is always an option.
Yeah, right.
When you roll the dice, sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. But the story in the world continues from that point. The GM is there to evolve that world and help the players tell a story of their adventures. And that's what I love about it, because it is not, I'm presenting a challenge to you. It is, we're going to tell a story together.
Yeah, and I think if you get a good group of friends at the table and people who are really invested, you can come up with some really good stories. And we've had that happen in both of our games that we're currently running. We've had some really funny moments come through. We've had some drama. We've definitely had mystery and monsters. But I definitely think part of the value in that is having, first of all, a good GM who is very comfortable going, okay, here's the setup, go for it. And then also just who's at your table, you know. When we play with the kids, it's very different. They didn't really understand the role-playing part to start with. But now that they understand it, it's becoming more of a story and less of a, well, let me do this action.
Yeah, and they get a lot of, what do they want to do? And they're building that role-playing part of it. And I think that's a whole other episode, too, of using RPGs for kids. Using that, what do you want to do? And then how do we frame that out? And, you can tell me what you want to say. You don't have to have all the right words. You don't have to be that smooth talker. Your character is a smooth talker. You tell me you want to try and convince them? Great, you roll for it. One of the cool things that's, a little more unique about Pathfinder 2e that I enjoy is the 3-action economy. There's a couple different layers to the playing of when you're exploring things versus when you get into combat or you get into these encounter modes. And when that happens, you have 3 actions you can do. So you don't have to worry about this concept of, well, I can do a move and I can do a standard action, which is a very Pathfinder thing. But also I want to have a free action, but I'm going to do a full round action to do this, or I'm going to have this bonus action. You have 3 actions. You can do 3 things. Most things take one of those actions. Some spells take 2 or 3. But then you can choose what you're going to do. That's one of the improvements I love over 1e. When I play in my 1e game, you just stand where you are and you attack. You don't move. You don't need to. I'm going to full attack. I'm going to do as many attacks as possible, and that's what I'm going to do for my turn. This brings in those other things that you want to do. So you can choose to attack with an action, and you can choose to do all 3 to attack, but they get harder and harder to hit. But then you can say, you know what? No, I'm going to try and intimidate that person. And I'm going to try to give them a condition that's going to make their things worse. Or I'm going to try to jump through their spot. I'm going to move.
I really like knowledge checks as one of my actions, especially with my wizard, because that character has a high intelligence. So knowing things about the creatures we're up against is oftentimes one of her strengths. So I like the knowledge checks because I can use one action for that, but it still leaves me enough to use a spell if needed. But it also gives myself and my team, my other players, information about how we can possibly put this creature at a disadvantage.
Exactly. And knowing those things can change the combat a little bit by knowing I don't have to make a mistake and find out that they're not going to be vulnerable to fire. I'm not going to waste that spell slot, or I'm going to find out they are very vulnerable to cold, so let's use that instead. And then you have those 3rd actions. So, like I said, you use that action to do a knowledge check. You can use that action to aid each other, to make the other person have a better chance. And it's freedom of, you tell me how you're going to aid them, and you can roll whatever role you want.
Or, if you're in one of our games, you can use that 3rd action to shove your friend in front of you towards the monster.
Yes. Speaking of your games, you also do have a lot of people getting poisoned around you. I'm just saying.
It's not my fault. I'm not the killer.
Yet.
I kill the monsters. I don't kill the NPCs, usually.
And so, yeah, the 3 actions is kind of one of the coolest mechanics I think they have there. And we talked about characterization, which also, is amazing. So we talked about how Path Builder 2e makes it very easy to build, but I love mechanics that are also story. And that's part of what the character builder does. You pick a background. So everybody was something before they were adventurer. But when you pick what they were, that gives you mechanical differences. It gives you a lore and a knowledge. So if you're a bartender, guess what? You're going to have known something. You might have like a lore alcohol, and you'll have boosts to some of your stats, and you'll have extra things. No matter what you pick, it changes. And a lot of them are very flexible, so you can pick this background, and it doesn't matter that you're picking this background, that I can't pick this one because it won't help my character. Almost all of them will help your character in one way or another.
I really enjoy that as well. And as I've been creating my characters, I like telling stories, both in-game and out of game. But I really like that gives you another jumping off point for your character and what they're about and why they're here. So in addition to adding to the mechanics, it also adds some richness to your character, some dimensionality before you even do anything. And we have a variety of backgrounds, and as we are in game finding out things about our different characters, a lot of times those backgrounds are coming into play. So you may not think it gives a lot of flavor to start with, but things come up and it really does.
Yeah, and it's cool because we play with a lot of new players. So it's a lot of fun to see people progress as they're going along. And when you have these things, you're making choices, it helps you flesh out your character a little more and help you find the character behind your sheet and kind of find that background and how they're going to interact with things. And so like those choices make a difference of, yeah, it makes a choice so they know these extra languages. Great, but then that becomes part of their backstory of why do they know all these languages? And it gives you these prompts to build your character out, to kind of build that role-playing, to build that fun. And I think the more you do with a character, to me, always makes a lot more investment in that character and kind of adds to what I like to do and escape into RPGs. And I love that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the escapism idea because I'm hooked on both my characters. Like when I'm finally done with them, I'm going to be a little sad because it's like when you read a book and you get very attached to the main character, a character in the story, except this time you're that character. You're deciding what they're going to do, what they're going to say, how they're going to react to something. And I've become very invested in both of my characters as we've played. While I have other awesome ideas that I'm excited for in another game, I definitely know that the day that we're finished and they either are killed or we level them out and they're done is going to be rough because I've spent so much time investing in not just their skills and their abilities, but okay, why do you have this skill? Why is this the skill you picked up? Why did you choose this ability? And again, mechanics like your background help inform that.
And that's actually another thing that's great. With Pathfinder, there's a rule for almost anything. So when you want to do something, you can look up the rule for it. The GM might already know all those rules. And if not, you look it up together and you find out what the rule is. So you want to do something, it's less arbitrary. It has already been thought out and balanced so that way it's a fairness at that level. When you want to do something, if you want to try to long jump across a ditch, there's rules for how far you can make it based on your role and what's realistic and what's not. And so there's always a way to help build what that's going to be.
Yeah, and from the games that you GM for us, we can definitely say we've pushed some of those rules and we have run up against some really obscure, out-of-the-box thinking. Shout out to our players and my teammates because they come up with some really unique solutions sometimes, myself included, because you don't know how we're going to come at this problem. For example, the one night you said, hey, there's a bar fight, what are you going to do? And one of our characters is like, I'm going to go try and break it up. And I remembered I had smoke sticks and the ability to cast ghost sound. So I made a fake fire. And, you had to go figure out, well, is anybody going to notice this? Are they going to break up the fight thinking there's a fire in the bar? Or are they going to keep fighting? And we really kind of push the boundaries. But every time, correct me if I'm wrong, you've run up against, hey, use this mechanic to figure that out. And if there isn't an exact mechanic, there's always one that's close enough.
Exactly. And there's just a chart of like base level DC. So you're at this level. Here's, something that's appropriate for that level of character to do. Here's the base DC to use. And then you can adjust it from there if you think something is harder and easier. But you're not, as a GM, I don't feel pressure to try to find the right number and the right value to use. And am I going to make it too hard or too easy? There's always these guidance to start there. When you do something really crazy like that, I use the bases as my starting point and kind of go from there. But the really most important thing is there's always this rule of fun to take precedence. And that's, yeah, you can do it. I'm going to allow it under these circumstances and let's try it. It helps because then it helps build people's creativity. Because if this is what I want to do, great. Is that something physically hard? Then I'll probably make you do athletics. If it's something where you got to be really slick and jumping around, okay, maybe acrobatics. But honestly, I let you guys talk me into what do you want to use. And it's something that I've had influence from other games, listening to other podcasts about, what do you want to do? How do you want to do this? If you make the good enough justification, rule of fun says, yeah, you can use that skill for that. Sure, you can roll knowledge nature for your initiative because you were looking at the plants at the time the monster jumped out at you. Sure, whatever. It's about having fun and allowing people that leeway to kind of do what they want to do.
Yeah, and I think the rule of fun is important because especially early on with new players, that's how you're going to engage them. Especially if they're a little leery or not quite sure what Pathfinder or an RPG is, that rule of fun's really going to help. And sometimes even having one experienced player at the table can help, that they can be a pseudo leader to be like, okay, what do you guys want to do? And kind of help them with options until they get comfortable. Versus, experienced players, that may be a lot easier to start a game, but a lot of people, this may be their first time, and I think that rule of fun really is a big deal in those situations, because that's what's going to get them into the game, get them enjoying it, and so on.
And that kind of comes into play. The Game Master, or GM, is a pivotal part of that ease to start and to get going, but you don't have to know everything. You got to have a little bit of confidence and know the basics and then just run with it. Like I said, look it up, make it up as you go along, and guess what? If you get it wrong and in between sessions over the week you figure out the right rule, you state at the beginning, okay, we did it this way last time, but this is the right rule, so this is what we're going to do going forward. Or you set your own standards. Say, from now on, this is what we're going to use, and it's our house rule. You don't have to be experienced to play. You can just try it and go with it.
We've talked a lot about it already, but enjoyment of the game. How much do you like Pathfinder 2e, John?
I guess you could say I love it, just a little bit, a lot. The fun stories that come out of these games, the kids always want to know what happened the night before on our game. Like when they know we have game night, that's one of the first things they would ask in the morning is what happened. They love these stories. I like it because it allows me to stretch my creativity and practice some funny voices that you may hear every once in a while. It also gives me an outlet to kind of explore yourself through role-playing. I think that's one of the best things about role-playing games in general is you can explore yourself, give confidence in who you are, who you want to be. You can be somebody different in the game, and that's okay. Heck, that's the idea. Your character doesn't need to be you. It can be someone you want to be, or it can just be somebody you think would be fun to play. It gives you that outlet for that.
I really get into the stories. Like I said, I love a good story. I enjoy being a storyteller. And we recently finished up an adventure path called Fall of Plaguestone, which we'll be talking about in a few episodes. And myself and the other players in that game really got into the storyline, and we were all very invested in proceeding towards the end without giving too much away. I don't want to give anyone spoilers, but that one has a bit of a mystery to it. And we were all very invested in solving that and resolving the issue in that adventure path. We were very invested in the NPCs, in the conflict, and the resolution of that conflict, even if it was very explosive and bloody, but, things happen.
So a lot of times for games, we're talking about how long does it take to play. This is a tough one for RPGs because it can be anything you want to be. So we generally run shorter sessions around an hour and a half with the kids.
A lot of that has to do with their attention span, but it also gives them a couple of events to occur before they kind of also start getting tired.
Yeah, and it keeps their attention, they have fun, and then they get to move on. But it's great because you can break it in any chunks you want. When we play our grown-up games, those are often, 2 to 3 hours. Many other people play much longer sessions. It can be as long as or as short as you want. The beauty is the story doesn't have to stop there. You can run a one-shot that you run in that 2 hours and then it's done and gone with, but we're running campaigns that have gone, 2 years now. I think the hardest problem for length of play is not having enough time to play as often as we want to. There's a lot more campaigns I would love to do.
Life, schedule conflicts, raising children, having to go to our jobs, all those things that get in the way.
One thing, reminder, is you can start out simple and grow. take the rules in and use what you need. Just start with those base rules. Ignore what you don't like. Use what you do like. Use the rule of fun. There's even out there you can find different rule sets that people use of their common house rules of things that they do to make things the way they like. And I have some that other games I've played in, I've brought into ours, regards to hero points and how some of those things work and what you can use them for.
As far as dice go, you can start with a base set. They're usually really easy and pretty cheap to find. Or you can use a dice roller app on your phone. You really don't need a lot to get going.
Yeah, you can do everything in the theater of the mind and describe what's going on, describe where the things are in relation to each other, and just kind of keep that in your heads. You can draw maps on a grid. And even there, you can start with you can get a laminated one on Amazon. You can even just print off grid paper or have grid paper. I may have run some games for work when I went to go visit New York, and I may have literally printed off grid paper so I could tape it together and then draw out the maps on when we played. Or you can get full detailed maps, 3D terrain elements, put up actual physical walls and little barrels. You can go as big or as little as you want to.
And that's all up to you. We've slowly been acquiring terrain elements as we go. The kids love playing with the terrain elements because it gives them something to see, but our adult games are all online, and sometimes it's theater of the mind, where John will describe what we can see, what's going on, give us an idea of where we are. And sometimes it's, a digital map that we can see on our computer screen. Again, you can start up with nothing. You just need your imagination.
For our kids, we all have little 3D miniatures of our characters of what they want to use. And some of them are painted, some of them are not. Some of them we're going to eventually try and paint because that's a whole other part of what you can do with RPGs. Other times we have flat stand-up images that we can use that you can print off, or I have some really nice ones called skinny minis that are hard plastic around them. And then sometimes we just put a little flat marker down to designate something. It can be anything you need to be. You can build it up as you go along. Playing online, where you can use Foundry or Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, all these tools for online map making. And yeah, when they go off the rails, sometimes you have to do theater of the mind because you don't have a map for that random place they decide they want to go stop in and go shop at. So yeah, you can learn more about Pathfinder 2e on paizo.com, their official website. And as I said, aeonprd.com is their official site for all the rules and all the monsters and everything that kind of goes with that.
Can you spell that one out?
Yes, paizo.com.
And Aeon?
Aeon, aonprd.com.
Thank you.
I'd also like to call out that the Paizo employees unionized in 2021 under the United Paizo Workers Union, making them one of the first unions of its kind in the tabletop role-playing game industry in the U.S., and I honestly think that's really cool, and I think it's a great step forward to helping all of those in the industry.
Agreed, especially because they employ so many contractors and independent artists for their products.
And some of them are just so talented, and it's, this will only help them get really paid what they're worth and what they deserve, and they can only help the whole industry as a whole.
Okay, so I think it's about time to wrap up. So, final impression?
I'd like to say, my final impression, it gives you a framework to play how you want, and telling a story is rewarding and a fun way to bond.
I really love the creativity that you have. I love to play, and I will gladly join more games, but I'm not as great at the fun voices like John is. But I definitely enjoy a good community play day or one-shot or, even another campaign. Not that I'm self-promoting, but I do love playing Pathfinder.
It's probably, let's wrap it up. I'm your host, John Wiki, and you can find me on Twitter as John_Wiki. That's Wickee.
And I'm Stevie, and you can find me on Instagram and other social media at Disney Geek Mom, DisneyGeekMom. I am not affiliated with the Mouse House.
Minute Tabletop is a Morecore Studios production. Theme song by Arthur Rowan, Morecore art by Ceda Duncan. Do you want more tabletop gaming fun? Subscribe to 20 Minute Tabletop on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Find out more at our website, 20minutetabletop.com. That's the numbers 20mintabletop.com. Or connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at 20minutetabletop. That's at 20mintabletop. Thank you, and roll with fortune.